This is a prayer and a reminder. All we have is now. Anak, umuwi ka na.
Worldwide this morning, growing concern over a growing health crisis.
The World Health Organization has just declared that this is a pandemic.
Hi. I can't hug you. Don't touch me.
Over the last several days, we have seen peaceful demonstrations.
Protests over police brutality continued here in Austin.
Remember when you started going to college? You came home a liberal?
Dad, please.
That's what we do to you guys in school.
All these people that we never met and never will meet because of what had happened to them. It's just too much.
The way that our family communicates is not necessarily, it's not great.
What advice would you give for those of us that are struggling?
Deal with it.
I think the norm for our community has been to just stay silent and like keep to your own business.
I could definitely be doing more than I'm doing right now, and I know that others can as well.
What if someone is called from God to be an activist?
I can answer that question.
Shouting revolution, oh wow, breaking each tradition.
You don't believe in the Black Lives Matter movement?
An advocacy group reporting at least 3,800 anti-Asian hate incidents since last March.
I'm kind of conflicted. I'm like, maybe I should move home and be here with them.
I hope that this moment makes you take a step forward and a step together in the right direction.
In order for a subject to not be taboo in our community, there always has to be like someone to start that conversation.
Yeah. You speak up for me when I can't speak up for myself. And I've seen you do that for other people.
I see a lot of people who just kind of cut off friends and family, and I don't think I can do that. I love my parents.
This is a symbol of our voices. If you look at your neighbors around you, you will see who stands with you, who stands for you.
At least I know that you can stand up. That's the thing I'm so happy about.
Although, all right, so what you're, I'm alluding to the fact that your three subjects, these three Filipino American women, were obviously all three figuring out like kind of similarly like a way of connecting to the world and to their families, you know, but at the same time trying to figure out how to make that work, you know. And talk to me a little bit, I guess, about like how you came to decide to make the film and like what your relationship with these people were. And when did you start making the film? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, I originally had an idea to make a film that was going to center around individuals having maybe challenging conversations with people that they kind of hold very close and dear to them. And that largely came about because I think at some point I realized in a lot of my previous films, there's usually a scene like that, right, where I've been following someone for a certain amount of time, and then we see them in this situation where they're with someone who they care very deeply about, and it comes to a point where they have a difference of opinion or some kind of challenge it amongst each other, and you see how they kind of navigate that kind of terrain, right? And for me, I think living here in the United States, I think there's a very common narrative of this idea of families having difference of opinions, and I think there's a kind of common narrative of like the Thanksgiving dinner, right, where someone is coming home to Thanksgiving and they just can't see eye to eye with Uncle so-and-so or their dad, and then it becomes this big explosive thing, and some people just avoid going home, and some people don't talk about things because it's too much to deal with, right? And at some point I realized I had a lot of Filipino American friends and community members that I saw who, though they were very vocal and outspoken, maybe about their politics, their views on the world, I would discover that many of them had family members back home who held very different points of view. So anyway, I set out to make a film that was going to explore this. And when I first did that, I kind of just put as I do for some of my films, I just kind of, contacted some friends, close colleagues, about it, and eventually, started moving on this idea, and then the pandemic hit.
I see. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it was an idea right before.
That makes sense now that you describe it like that, because I was like wondering, well, if they were shooting themselves on Zoom, like why would they record all these? It's just like it makes sense that they would have now already they might be participating in this project of yours.
Yeah, and I mean, essentially, I had these conversations with each of them about what was going on in their life. What are some of the things that they were thinking about? Who are some of the people that, they're surrounded by that they would maybe want to have some of these conversations with? And then when the pandemic hit, it became very clear to me the urgency of the situation, and how if I'm looking for some kind of, moment where there's a moment of growth and transformation, like this is it, and thankfully all of them, agreed to do it. So it was, kind of, it was kind of circumstance and timing, but I had the idea right before going into it. I think I actually started solidifying the idea in, January was when I definitely was like, I should do this. February-ish, beginning of March is when I was starting to have these conversations, and then boom, it hit. I was like, okay,
but the real divisiveness has already been existing since 2016. I mean, the start of Trump. I mean, really.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
this would have worked either way. It's just that you might have had less Zoom footage. I guess maybe.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, and that was absolutely it, is I felt like we were living, we still are living in very divided, divisive
oh my God,
times.
Totally.
So,
What is it about, though, the Filipino? Is it just the traditional family seems to have been, in one generation, it seems like there's a real change in the Filipino community, or at least Filipino American community. I was in a relationship. I don't know if you remember. Well, last time we spoke, I might have even been in that relationship with a Filipino American person, and I mean, just from her mother to her was such an incredible change of values, or of ways of whatever, and many different ways, politically and socially and otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what I'm looking at really is Filipino Americans, right? So the experience of these three young women who, are children of immigrants. So their experience is very different from, their parents. But one of the things I think about is, specifically in Filipino culture, the idea of like a multi-generational household is not unheard of. It's very much, commonplace, less so here in the United States, but definitely in the Philippines. And there is this idea of like the different generations all living together, all kind of in close comfort. That idea of like you're 18, you move out and you go to a different city. That's more, in my opinion, that is somewhat more of a modern kind of American kind of narrative, right? But the more traditional narratives, at least in the Philippines, is this idea of a multi-generational household. So this idea of having an intergenerational exchange is not foreign, to Filipinos. And then I think what complicates it are these ideas of respect, right? And even in the film, we hear Lauren's family talk about that a little bit, like this idea of like, you don't talk back to your parents, you don't disrespect them, they're your elders, you honor them. And I think no one would disagree with that. I think, of course, that's what we want to do. But I do think, now speaking as someone who grew up here in the United States, we're so encouraged to be like individuals, speak our mind, speak your truth, like all of these kinds of things. So then there becomes this cultural kind of conflict.
Right. And
Right?
it's right. And it's clear the older generation also do have a desire to understand and connect with their offspring and the next generation, even though maybe they struggle. But I do see that in all those parents and aunts and aunties and uncles and all.
Absolutely. And I
You know.
think one of the things, for me specifically, as I got older, I had to start recognizing my parents, the older generations than me, they have their own experiences also. Like I mean, when I was growing up, I was very like, oh God, I'm living, as, a queer person of color in a very conservative area. This is really challenging and difficult. But to be quite honest, I don't even know what it would be like to pick up and decide to move to a different country and leave everything that I once grew up with behind. That's not my narrative. And I can't even imagine what that narrative and experience would be like. But I think when I was younger, I didn't really think about that in terms of my parents' story. And then as I get older, I do think about these things because it's like, these are the choices they made. This is the experience they had. And it's so wildly different from mine. And to be honest, it's probably so wildly different from their parents who didn't do the same thing, So I think there is something there too, in terms of like recognizing the differences. Then we also recognize kind of some of the commonalities here. Like we each have our very unique and different kind of experiences.
What was the I forget where you premiered the film, or it's played in a number of festivals, I assume. But I was wondering what maybe the families thought of the how the film came out, and were they happy with it and glad that they participated?
Yeah, I mean, because so much of the film, because the film very much focuses on, this idea of self-documentation, or, the protagonist kind of documenting their experiences. I think, the idea of their parents seeing their kids filming something is also not unusual. This younger than me generation is very much has grown up in this like self-documentation, posting on the internet, like, yay, this is what I did Friday night, all these kinds of things. So I think that wasn't unusual for them. I think when they realized it was for a documentary, and for a larger piece, that was interesting. And of course I screened it for everyone before, the film got released.
Of
And then
course,
some of the reactions were really interesting, of course. And I think the largest reaction was just seeing other families and other storylines and seeing these kind of commonalities, between, or them seeing kind of what their, what their child was saying, so yeah, so the reactions were really good. It was a lot more, I think with every documentary I make, there's always an emotional element to it, obviously. And so I think seeing it all together was, a really big kind of emotional moment for everyone in the film, including myself.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. And then somehow, when did Array enter when did Array enter the picture? How did that work? How did that happen?
So right before the pandemic hit, in 2019, I think it was October of 2019, which is Filipino American History Month, so it probably was, in Los Angeles, Array had programmed a weekend of Filipino American films.
Oh.
That was programmed by Marie Hamora, who's an amazing filmmaker and also has a Filipino American curated series called Cinema Sala in Tagalog meaning living room. So I think they invited Marie to co-curate this program, and she, and one of my previous films, Call Her Ganda, was one of the films. Amazing weekend. I got to meet everyone at Array. They got to, meet me, see some of my work. And then from that point on, I think they were just paying attention to whatever I was working on. So then when I released this film, they took some interest in it. And to be honest, I can't imagine a better partnership than, this company of like real, you know, fierce, amazing women of color who are truly like transforming the film industry. So it's such a honor, you know, to be working with them.
I'm sure it is. Yeah. And was when did Netflix come in? Was that helped by the relationship with Array? I can't imagine it would have hurt, but or do they have an existing sort of deal with Netflix?
Yeah, from my understanding, I mean, you know, Array is
What a
distributing
great
films, and
break.
I think, yeah, and I
Yeah.
think, you know, Netflix is one of the ways that they do it. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, have you had a film distributed by Netflix before?
my first two previous films were on Netflix, but it was also when Netflix was a little bit of an earlier.
Sure.
Like I actually think the
When they're
first,
producing less original content, in other words.
yeah, like the first film I made, I think it was on Netflix when it was still DVDs. You know, it was
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
DVDs and
Yeah,
on the
I think I
on the.
ordered. Yeah, I may have ordered that one actually. Yeah.
And then the second one I think was when it transitioned to fully, you know, online or streaming. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to see the evolution of Netflix.
Well, folks can go directly actually from here to Netflix and watch What We Become or Who We Become.
Who We Become.
Who Become. Yeah, sorry about that. So let me rephrase. People can go directly from here to Netflix actually right after this and watch Who We Become. So how many films does this make, PJ, that you made? You're very prolific.
This is in terms of features number 4.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This is number 4 in terms of features. In between, I've made a couple shorts here and there.
Yeah.
Not maybe necessarily prepared to talk about it yet, but I also have 2 other feature documentaries that I'm trying to finish up.
Oh, and here I was. Well, you're on a roll. Here it is. I was. Well, take advantage of the time. You're obviously you're on a tear here. But what do you have? Is there ever any interest in making a narrative film?
Yeah, actually, I do. You know, actually, my background was narrative filmmaking, so I would love to,
Oh,
return to it or revisit it at some point.
how did you get sidetracked?
I was working largely as a cinematographer. So I went to, I did the whole, went to film school, got my MFA. And when I was there doing that, I only made narrative films, and I was and I was doing a lot of cinematography work.
And where was that?
At the University of Texas at Austin.
Austin.
So UT Austin.
Okay. Yeah.
And so by the time I graduated, I was already a working professional as a cinematographer. And I mostly filmed independent narrative features, things like that. And then I filmed a narrative feature that was largely improvised, handheld, very spontaneous filming.
What they might call documentary style.
And some producers saw it, asked me if I would, film some documentary work. And then that just kind of, started my exploration into documentary. And then, to be quite honest, at the time period, filmmaking was, I'm going to definitely like date myself saying this now, but like at the time, right? And this is like more the early mid 2000s. This is really before the rise of a lot of streaming platforms and before the big digital explosion. It was right around the time that it was kind of happening. So a lot of the independent films that I was working on were shot on Super 16, and they had certain budgets and were requiring a certain amount of money, and it required a certain amount of cast to sign on, and someone would approach me and then it would take a while, And what I loved about watching documentary filmmakers where something was happening and they just grabbed a camera and started filming right on the spot. And it was just so exciting to see how fast and reactive and spontaneous they could be. And it was like such an adventure. You don't even know what's going to happen half the time. I mean,
and I think that was also the appeal and why they created such an appetite for, film lovers and or audience, the audience out there, because, they felt the same way. They love the energy and the, I mean, you're still telling stories, it's just a much more, just a different way of doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to answer your question, I would love to. I actually wrote a short screenplay that I would love to make this year. and I'm working on a narrative feature. And I actually think making documentaries has been some of the best training for me in terms of thinking about story, thinking about character, thinking about all the elements of what makes, good films. So I would like to get to a place where I'm not really thinking so much about, is it doc, is it narrative, is it this, is it that? It's just more like, what's the story? What's the best way to kind of tell it,
Yeah, that's a good way. That's a good way of putting it, because I think it's usually the marketing companies and distribution companies that are more concerned with those issues than the filmmaker. It'd be interesting to
Yeah.
see. Yeah. And there's been so many films that have sort of played with that. Obviously, with that line.
Yeah,
And
and
it
for
really
me,
been it's can be very exciting if it's done right.
absolutely. And for me, even with this film, Who We Become, the reason also I wanted to make it was to remind myself that there's different ways of making films.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who spent so many years working as a cinematographer, who's always placed so much emphasis on the visuals, that, all these kinds of things, it was so freeing and liberating to be like, you know what, I'm going to put the I'm going to put the camera in the hands of the protagonist
Mm-hmm.
and see what they do. And I'm really going to explore, more collaboration within this project. And I don't know, it was really freeing to kind of get away from that narrative of, because having made several films now, I started falling into this narrative of like, okay, you have this idea, you have to raise a certain amount of money, and all the elements of what I loved about documentary, which was just like, no, I got this idea, I'm going to go outside and start filming it now. Like that kind of started to fade a little bit. And so this was for me, it was an opportunity to kind of like resurge that interest of like, what are some of the elements I really love about this genre of filmmaking? And I think what's, interesting for me was when the pandemic started emerging and things were, obviously pivoting and shifting, like my drive to make like increased like tenfold, like it was like exponential every day. I was like, I can't believe this is happening. Like, oh my God, what about this? Like, we got to think about this, and we should be, talking about this. And so again, so for me, this was an opportunity to also just kind of grow as a filmmaker.
Well, apparently so. And again, it's called Who We Become. It's on Netflix right now. The director's PJ Raval. And how's Texas? Finally, how is it living? I mean, you're in the bubble.
I am.
You're in Austin, but
even being in Austin, we're subject to state laws.
apparently, yeah, it's been
living in Texas, we're subject to federal laws. So it's kind of
right. Yeah, yeah.
It's a challenge. It's a challenging place to live in. I'm not gonna lie, but it's also, there's some really great things about it. And some great things about the people here as well. And
sure.
Yeah. So
And
how's Texas? I think we could talk about that for hours.
Probably so. And look, anything's possible. That we may be surprised by what Texas ends up doing in the next couple of years, like in terms of its relationship to the rest of the country.
Well, I have to also acknowledge that I grew up in California, and I also grew up in California in a very conservative part, which was Central California. And when my family moved to California, it was still quite conservative. And now it's become this like liberal beacon, and I don't know.
There are parts still very, very red in California still.
Well, I mean, not to say the obvious, but even New York, right? Like everyone thinks, New York City.
Yeah, where I live up here
is
yeah, it's very purple up where I am here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, clearly, as we acknowledge, we're living in some pretty extreme, divided times,
Right. That's why I'm going to recommend all the more people watch your documentary, Who We Become.
Thanks.
Yeah. Right. And I will look forward to doing this maybe in person again someday.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. It'd be great to see you in person. Maybe we can do it in a movie theater.
That would be fine with me.
Theater lobby.
Exactly. Let's do it. Yeah, like old times. Exactly. All right. Well, thanks for making time on this Sunday, I guess afternoon for you. I appreciate it. No, it's morning still. I appreciate it. Thanks for I know it's already on Netflix, so but I was kind of like saying I got to get PJ back on. I really would love to have him. It's one of the things I actually like most about doing this thing is being able to, follow somebody's career, bring somebody back on, and all the, it creates kind of a community around the show, which I really really like. So
Yeah,
thanks.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
and to be quite honest, the film is going to be on Netflix for several years, and what it's talking about, these things aren't changing overnight.
No,
So
no,
we-
very true,
yeah,
very true. So, for
yeah,
better, for worse, very true. So,
yeah.
watch the film and have some rough conversations, but maybe some enjoyable conversations. The most gratifying, I think, experience is having difficult conversations and coming out of it. Still sort of respecting your loved ones, your family, who you maybe have differing, um, ideas about, but you can come together with love and respect, and I think that's what the film is about. So
Absolutely,
it's a
Yeah.
great idea. Yeah. All right. Well,
Thank you.
we'll be in touch then. All right.
All right, thanks. Good to
Thank
see you.
Same here. Enjoy the
All
rest
right.
of your day.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you. All right.
Bye.
Bye.